Wow, so many people. I'll try to keep doing this without getting dizzy. Yeah, this is awesome. I'm super excited to be here. It is a fantastic venue, and because there were not enough screens, I brought another screen. I like odd numbers instead of even numbers. Cool. Well, again, I'm thrilled to be with all of you here. And today, I'm going to talk about raising the game, not just the video games, but your game in UX. So I'm going to be covering what are the challenges and opportunities of maturing UX in organizations. And clicker. And it's on, and clicker. There we go. When we think about creating amazing user experience, we tend to think about how the design is delighting the user. We look into understanding who our players are, what they like, how we are going to satisfy them and giving this sense of reward. We need to know who they are and what they want, ultimately. And doing all this is great. We talk about users a lot. Yet, we only discuss about users primarily, and we forget that those designs are actually products of people who work at organizations. So you are either working at a company, or maybe you are contracting for a company, you are your own business, or even if you're a student and you're going to break into your professional career, you want to know how developed a company is in regard to the development of user experience as a discipline. Because to improve the quality of design, we have to look at the both sides of the coin. It's going to be about the users, but it's also going to be about the companies and the people producing them. And like people, organizations do have capabilities that we want to increase and growth through time. And there are going to be a lot of components that we're going to want to get better at. So ultimately, I want to share with you some of my experience on addressing this topic. Who am I? Well, I'm Veronica Zammitto. I work at Electronic Arts, one of the bigger game companies globally in the world. And I have had the privilege over the last 8 years of working with many talented teams across EA. We have a big portfolio. Some of them might be familiar with games like FIFA. I would expect that in Brazil. Come on. We're properly football. And other games like Battlefield, I'm going to be showing you tidbits of that. I've been working on UX research, developing and growing the team there for the whole company. And part of my background has been in psychology. To me, the human mind is the ultimate puzzle. There is no fixed answer. There are multiple lenses that you can look it at through. And ultimately, it is about finding different ways to understand it. That applied to human-computer interactions has been like a 360 view of how do I look at our players? How do I tap on their satisfactions and motivations? How to make things fun? But growing that team at EA has also taught me about what it takes to develop good, healthy teams that can have an impact in the organization. And that translation of psychology also applies to organizational psychology. So at EA, we have a magnificent pillar. One of those pillars is players first. which is a glorious pillar to have because it's ultimately advocating for user-centered design. It is about that a good EA product is going to be a product that has the player at the forefront of any needs that we developed. And this is very important because it taps into what kind of culture do we have for the organization. And this pillar was actually brought in 2013 when the new CEO, who started then, Andrew Wilson, was bringing a new way of looking at how we want to develop games. So this player first was going to be a cultural shift in the whole organization, which is key to be able to push that maturity, because you also need these top-down executive champions to help you to come up. You have the people doing it from the bottom up, but you also need to be met from the top down. I want to show you how we see it when we create compelling experience at EA, how all the contributions of different team members are actually employing different skills, and how all those come together in a game like Battlefield. This is Battlefield 5, who actually came up with premiere a couple of weeks ago. Have someone play Battlefield 5 yet? Hands there, nice. Yes, love you all. So I'm going to be showing you like a short videos of these games, and I'm going to be, again, highlighting how some of the impacts and implications from a strategic, but also from a tactical level. I know, I wanted to keep watching it again. I will keep watching over and over. It's that excitement of the music. But this is just to give you a tidbit of, that was the official trailer for the game. Battlefield is a franchise that has been for a really long time, almost 20 years. So it was first released in 2002. As you notice, it's a shooter game. So we shoot people, but we are also vehicles that you can actually drive, like the tanks, there are planes. And Battlefield 5, the setting is in World War II. This is important for me to show you, not only for the excitement, but it is, as you might notice, it's all cinematic, which actually is not, it is using the game engine to produce that, so it's the actual graphics, but it's like this amazing epics point of view, which is not necessarily the point of view that you see as a player. However, this is already part of the player experience. So this is one of those aspects that you need to keep bringing into the organization, that every deliverable, it is part of an encompassing user experience. So actually, for producing this trailer, of course, marketing was involved, but not just for the promotion, but it was actually way before then, when we have to understand who was actually the specific players that we wanted to address with this game. What are the needs that they want to be addressed? What are going to be satisfying? Battlefield is highly competitive, so how are we bringing that sense of competition into the game? But it also has to be with a lot of input and feedback from producers and the creative directors, because they have the vision of what the game is supposed to be. And they want to communicate how the pillars of the game, such as being epic, having destructible terrain has to be part of that and how to showcase the game. So I'm going to show you another short video. This is actually from a player. Actually, it's awesome because I grabbed it from like an actually end user who actually uploaded to YouTube. And the whole point here is that it's a first time playing the game. You saw that it was an information architecture to where they have to go.
Grand
so
operations.
We have to have our
Grand
interaction designers in
chains
this.
together several game modes and
Going to
maps
jump
in an
onto a
urban
mode.
experience, split
We're
into
being
several
shown a
unique
video
areas.
with onboarding.
Most grand
They have to
operations
be
start with
a
airborne.
UX writer
Jumpers
who have
parachute
to
in.
actually
Pick up
put
points.
into words that have to be easy to understand to convey that experience. We keep going, and so like it seems that the person was watching the onboarding and was going to start the game, but actually decided to skip watching the onboarding. So many times we have that player journey design, but actually our users can have multiple paths. It is also not only backed up from the onboarding, but the person is on a queue to join a game. If you look at the bottom right part, there is a countdown of finding a game, where it's the expected time that it should take you at most to join a game, and then the time that has been in queue to join that. So the person is actually taking the time to personalize their experience by putting the specific weaponry that they want to use on their soldier. So again, how are we putting like visual design, how those icons are going to represent what they can do? And of course, this is all encompassed with user research that we have been doing throughout the whole development process. And just to mention just a few of all the different roles that have been involved in just to show you that snippet. And once the person goes in the game, click and click. We have the loading screen. So right now, if you look at the top right, there's the loading component. And we have like a UX engineer to actually should be involved in the time that it takes you to go into the game, because you're already in the game. You don't need to be deployed on the actual field. You're already part of the whole experience. And we have the person actually joining that game, finishing the feeling around that person started with their weaponry, decided now what ultimately bring with them. And then finally is going to go back to the deploy screen and join it. And now you have with all those players, actually like 64 players in these matches. So there are like a lot of people and social interaction. There's a chat window, so we can chat with your squad. Again, mini maps. The person has certain objectives at the top. We are bringing a lot of different skill sets to actually show this experience for the players. There's a matchmaking that has to be against other people. So we also have analysts to actually assess what kind of player you are based on your skill set, and actually match you with people at about your same level to have a fair experience of what you are actually be challenged at your right level. And even when you die, so here is the final snippet for this. You're actually also being shown information. Some of them is going to be trying to be more minimalist, such as your health. The screen gets splotchy. Your leaderboard, how you're doing comparing to other users. So there are a lot of elements. I just wanted to show with you an example of the kind of products that we produce, the breadth of the different skill sets that we bring, and what the roles are. Making games is complex. We just deconstructed those multiple components. and all those different skill sets that gets involved in that production. And I'm positive that all those skills are also transferable to all your products. When you start teasing apart what needs to be there, is going to be part of that richness. So the point here is that UX is this multifaceted UX effort that goes across the whole organization. And I want to share with you a model of UX that I found it fascinating because it really translates what are different roles and functions across an organization. So as you can see here, it is bringing those business goals, it's bringing that market research component, it's bringing the direction that the company wants to go through, but it's also bringing the content that needs to be displayed and how that is going to be actually set up in a way that the players can actually interact with it. So I highly recommend that you can dissect some more of this within your organization, because this model is going to really help you to streamline your communication. It's going to give you a certain language that you can use to talk to the other functions, to be more clear on what you want to achieve, what are going to be those deliverables, what process you want to refer to. We mentioned that UX is a very complex process, so you need to simplify it into bite size that you can actually say what that huge process is going to be. Hopefully you felt like a little bit overwhelmed when I was telling you all the ingredients in Battlefield, but because they are there. But when you're talking to other stakeholders, when you're talking to partners, you need to be more succinct, and particularly what you want to tell them or how that process is going to be, because on the next point, you need to enable that collaboration. You need to be able to, when you scale, to delegate tasks, to delegate deliverables. So you need to be very clear in that. And ultimately, when you review your organization with this, you can see if you're missing any gaps. Are you doing all those different components? If you're not, maybe you have a missed opportunity right there to actually drive for a very distinctive feature or way of working that can bring more innovation in your own organization. And go again. So ultimately, what I'm advocating here is that UX that is better can only be applied in a way that is a company-wide commitment, where you have teams with these skill sets that have breadth, and that you need to streamline those integrations. So you want to bring down certain silos that naturally happens in organization. And you want to definitely have UX as an explicit role within that org. So when I mentioned about player first at EA, that was part of that evolution. It was that part to finally be in some way, shape, or form to be explicit about our own products. And that was part of a whole journey that we have been going through. And actually, all companies are going through that same journey. And the journey starts here. When we talk about that journey, I'm referring to UX maturity. A UX maturity is a model that outlines typical stages that organizations go through. There are a multitude of different models out there. You have seen the one from Nielsen, you might have seen the one from academia, and all of them outline those capabilities that you want in your organization. So again, typically about between 4 and 8 different stages, and there are typically different capabilities that you want in that organization. And I summarize those in a way to be more concrete and simplify or how you want to do that evolution. So within those capabilities, we have definitely processes, we have staff and the resources that they need to be effective, and we have a culture. And I've been giving you some tidbits of that, but allow me to jump into more detail on each of those. So regarding processes, that's going to refer to how do we do UX and how we're going to be talking about it. So when I do refer about how do we do UX, it is about setting up certain established practices and efficiencies in the work that you want to do. And it has to be this cross-disciplinary effort that goes across the different functions. When we're starting one stage, there might be no UX process. Maybe we are just coding and products get out of the door and things happen. There might be there is no UX process at all. As you go through time, what starts to happen is that some UX is done ad hoc. Maybe that programmer is actually kind of like good at interaction design, so they start doing a little bit of that ad hoc work. But ultimately, you're passing a major threshold when there are certain design systems that are being put in place. And with that, I do refer to specific definitions and definitions on how the interaction and how the UX needs to be in place. Ultimately, when you think about the processes of a company, what I mean is the user-informed company is going to be processes that are in place on how the information of our understanding of users is going to feed directly into what the business is going to do as a new product. So let me actually put that in a very concrete example. And actually, I'm going to use, this one is from Google. They have all this public information, and definitely encourage you to go to their sites. And they're extremely insightful. In the way that they do UX, they do encourage a lot how to do sprints. They really want that fast pace. They have very well-defined steps of ideation, prototyping, quick test, and iterate again. That could be just one of those tidbits that has been that component of how we do it, like just passing that ad hoc that now is like formalized. Then they do have their design systems. They have very well articulated definitions of what is good, what good looks like, in the way that there is a language for what their product should be. And even more so like Apple, that also have to dictate how the design should be in many other applications. But ultimately, one of the major changes that Google have done, even we don't just consume their products, but even when they became Alphabet, and they are starting to have other type of business, they have such a good understanding of our users, of ourselves, that now they are actually initiating new businesses within the organization, like with Google Health. They know how they can use data in a way that is going to be transforming lives. So now the company has been increasing their platform to create new ways of delivering new products. The other capability in organizations is staff and the resources. So in this case, we can be from, many of you might have been in a company has like no one was a UX person. And then again, some people might be doing some of those functions just because they were good at that. But as we evolve, there have to be specific roles that have to be defined. And those roles, because of the function that they do, need specific tools. But ultimately, as I was teasing you earlier, you will need to have the extreme of staff in a UX organization. When you do have an executive layer, being part of that UX, that maybe you have like a head of UX design, that is someone in that experience design level that is going to be really bringing the organization up and opening those doors. So actually at EA, it is interesting because we're a large organization that has almost like 30 years on the ground and has been an amalgamation of experiences. So here are the most typical roles within EA for those products. So we have our UA designers, we have our UI designers, we have UX engineers. For us, technology, it is quintessential to be enabled to enable the functions that we want for the players. It is interesting as well that at the beginning, they were just game designers, and they had to do it all. So we went from a transition of specializing more and more and more. We have resources where we can have people who are actually very defined on one of those depths of their specialty. So in different companies, they have more people who might be more like specialists. Like in EA, we have a variety of those roles. And other companies, they have a more generalist. Maybe you have one person who can do a little bit of everything. And that's fine too. Your strategy should align with the size of your company, with the size of your needs, and how you want to move it forward, or what stage you are. When I was referring to tools, something that has come up quite often at EA is that we have studios that work together, but they are remote, different locations. Battlefront, another of our shooter games, was actually developed by DICE, which is actually in Sweden, with Motive, that is in Canada, and Criterion, which is in the UK. So we have multiple time zones, multiple roles, humongous game, and it has a way that we can actually enable the communication and critiques of those assets and those contents in a way that was very streamlined. Whoa, ta-da! Let me go back, I got crazy clicky here. Not spoilers, close your eyes. Come on, clicker. There we go, one. The last component that I wanted to share with you in terms of those capabilities in your organization is UX maturity, is culture. And that one, it's interesting because it's one of those that are like harder to get more concrete, but it is actually the one who is going to bring that glue together. You have all these different ingredients. You have your resources, you have your people, they're going to be doing X in a very organized manner in the process, but you need to actually put some DNA or how you want them to behave, or how you want them to actually attain to certain values. And at the beginning, it might be that maybe a company doesn't have too much of a culture in UX. And then certain people are starting to appear, and they're going to bear certain identities. There might be like the UX person going on here. And those people might start like gravitating together, and it's going to start forming a sense of community. And when there's a sense of community big enough, that is going to become in an explicit level, at an organizational level, as a pillar. So at EA, in my case, when I even started, nobody had UX in their title. Experience design was not a thing. And I might be dating myself now, but it was not a thing back then. At most, people would be talking about usability. Actually, UX research was usability engineers, even though you have nothing to do with computer science, for instance, even if you were coming from social science. So those sense of identities were the burst of a bigger movement. And it was very interesting because at the time, it was just a handful of us about UX. So every time that we find each other, we'll be like happy, like, oh, like meeting the family, and it's like, how are you doing? And you want to keep track of those people. And we start doing very informal gatherings. So once a month, we'll make sure that we'll put in our calendars and get together. And we have this very informal sense of community, which through time has evolved into a strike team, where there are being like workshops organized, or people like really leaning on each other on what are the best practices, what are the lessons learned from one product or feature that can be translated to another one. The symbol in the middle, for the last 7 years, I also been organizing an internal conference to EA, which is UX Con. And that was another way to actually bring that community together, to help these people to have that sense of belonging that actually was shaping how the company has to be. And I mentioned back to you about that player first and having that encounter between the identities, those communities that we were forming with the player first. And that makes the healthiest balance of all. Those journeys are marvelous, and it can last a lot of time. Actually, Nielsen says that going throughout all the stages, it can take a company 20 years. 20 years. So, play the long game. Don't be frustrated if there are challenges, because there are going to be challenges. Many of the companies I mentioned might sound sometimes like intuitive, like, yeah, that makes sense. And those are the things that happen when you look at them in hindsight, and how you're going to overcome those. So one of those challenges for us in UX maturity has been, it's so easy to get caught on the immediate deliverable. We have deadlines, we need to make them work, that's a constant pressure. And specifically for Battlefield, I mentioned to you, it's a franchise with almost 20 years of experience. But you have to be innovating. You have to be changing. So there is a tension between the interaction that you want to deliver for this immediate product, but where is that hump into making something different at the time? And it's so tempting to just continue with the momentum and making small tweaks, but you need to make a larger leap to actually not get so attached to just make it happen. So challenge yourself into how you're going to break that innovation. And the other one is very easy to miss that end-to-end player experience. And I have to admit, even if it still happens for us at EA, I was talking to different team members on Battlefield, and I was like doing a stakeholder interview and poking around where their certainties were, and each of them had a different way of defining the end-to-end experience. So some of them, for the game designer, was more about starts when they are actually launching the game and finishes when they rage quit. And that's different. It was the reason why I showed you that video of the trailer. That's part of the user experience as well. The bottom screenshot is actually our website. That's part of the player experience as well. So we have a bigger umbrella that goes beyond interaction design, it goes beyond user experience. It goes more towards customer experience. So try to also take a step back of the immediate deliverables that you might be working on and get related to what the sanity check with your other stakeholders, with your partners, because that's when you're going to have the possibilities to align in the direction of the product. So end-to-end experience might mean different things for different people. Other challenges are on the next slide. Is iterative design. by now we assume that we're all agile, right? We do agile. But really, when we get in reality, there are some pain points, some friction points, and that happens to us as well. So many times, implementation comes late. It might be driven maybe because UX is seen as a service instead of part of a team. So how are we allowing that to be right of the get-go? Another pain point for us is also with these very large games that for developing them, we have to cut them into vertical slices. And that actually, it's a problem of scope that you need to deal with when you are developing. So when you have this vertical slice, which is not representing the whole experience for the players, but we still need to iterate on those cycles. So you have to make a commitment between the scope of that iteration that you can produce without losing sight of the final end product. Another interesting story of efforts that we did at EA has been exploring and transitioning from different ways of organizing UX. And you may have seen different models of being like embedded UX, central UX, and hybrid. So it's ultimately saying that a UX staff can belong to maybe different teams, and that would be embedded. They are fully part of that product and feature, which actually allow for maximum tailoring of that team needs. But the downside is that people might start doing different things, and all of a sudden, in your own same product, you have different ways of doing it, and your standardization shatters. Another way to try to keep that standard is to have everyone central. And it's awesome, there is a lot of standardization, but sometimes being at that arm length from a product team, it might make the UX person feel a little bit of an outsider. So you have to get the balance between that tailoring and the consistency. And that's what the hybrid model is trying to do. So it will be a core team of being central, trying to maintain those standards, but it's still very, very embedded and tailored to different products. And that's a way of describing what those communities of practice are nowadays in UX. And that has been that journey, actually, with UX research, that we used to be extremely central. Resources are also more scattered when you're central. We never tried embedded because it was going to be actually way too demanding on resources. So right now, we're settling to be in this more like hybrid model where we can keep fostering this sense of community of practice. One of the last challenges, and I want this one to like bring it to another level, because I'm sure that you have heard a lot about tracking different KPIs, and maybe for your own product you're using SUS to measure your usability scale and how to compare to other benchmarks out there. NPS being broadly used as well. Get your outputs in place to actually showcase how much value you are bringing, conversion rate, you name it. There are a bunch of other KPIs out there. And please, if you don't have a KPI being used in your product, make sure that you use a KPI, key performance indicator, to track the evolution of how your product is getting better. And that's going to talk a lot about the added value that you bring to the product and to the company. Once you have a KPI, you also need to transform advocated for UX maturity to that executive level that I mentioned to you before. And nothing speaks better to executives like talking about return of investment. And I wanted to share that piece of information that is actually a design value index developed by the Design Management Institute, that they categorize rigorously companies that they identify that have capabilities of design-centric companies. And they put it into this bucket, which is actually that red line. And then they compare it to the S&P, which is actually a group of the top 500 companies traded in the stock market. And they saw their performance of their stocks over a period of 10 years and find out that actually those center design companies had a revenue that was 211% higher than the top performing companies in the market. So that's another way to speak to that executive level to get your UX champions on that value that you bring in your concrete KPIs that are here and now, and your concrete impact to those products, but also in the bigger picture. Many times you have to be thinking about 5, 10, 15 years. Imagine the future of your players. And they will give you that piece of information to speak to those other stakeholders. So that's about the challenges that I wanted to share with you today. However, I want to do a call for action. You all have homework, so take notes. Grab a coffee. I do what I need to do my homework. So I really want to know, how can you evaluate your organization? How can you start next week on Monday and start transforming to bring that journey to the direction that you want? So first thing first is really going to be survey the lay of the land. And I want you to focus on those specific aspects to start thinking where your organization is, where you are, and where you're going to do it. So think about, you want to identify what's the current status on all this. So the one that I mentioned was a company. It's UX maturity for organization is going to be the company, so you have to bring it all on board. You need to identify your UX champions, those people who are going to be behind you creating those pillars and coming from the top down. Or if you can be that top down, please start bringing your whole organization on board. And talk to them about key questions that UX can help shape the organization. One of those should be, what's the level of satisfaction of users with the product? And you might already have a sense of that, but the whole point of asking it at this organizational level is to make the company responsible for this question and not necessarily just the UX people doing the work. The other section is about, we talk about staff and the different roles. So you got your executives, now get your champions, maybe managers, maybe directors, but also the people who actually do the work, so your designers, your researchers, your analysts. And it would be a really interesting exercise to actually know what's the ratio of designers to developers. And have some of the information I was shared on TechCrunch about what's the ideal ratio and the evolution of key companies that now have been iconic for transforming the user experience, how they actually had to change that ratio. Atlassian, Dropbox, IBM. No wonder why it survived all these other companies. From 1 to 72 to 1 to 8. That they really had to accelerate that in only 5 years. So the value that all of you bring to the organization is being demonstrated with one of the bigger companies that changed the landscape of user experience. So it's a recommendation that should be a minimum of 1 to 12 designers to developers. Some people that are even more extreme are advocating for 1 to 4. As you can see here, they are mostly set in 1 to 8. So I would love to, that's an exercise that we're trying to do at E8 right now. We're still defining those roles, who is really a developer and who is really a designer, and the variety of that. That's a completely different conversation. But at least identify who is the developer, who is this broad umbrella of designers, and what's the ratio in your org? Do you need to level that up? And that's part of the work that we are also doing internally. And when we have these people, match it again, those functions that are responsible for. What are the capabilities of these people? And do a gap analysis of where would you like to be and where you are. Because ultimately, you want to augment those skill sets. So I summarize it in those 2 questions about evolution and alignment. What should be the prototypical roles in your org? And if you don't have them, that's okay. You have an excellent proposal plan of where the business should go. What are you missing, and how we are going to bring them on board. The next one is about processes, and we talk about that. And guilty of chart, as well as things that sound intuitive. Hey, identify and document your current UX process. We are doing it, right? Again, guilty of, there's so much tribal knowledge that is passed in companies. We know what we're doing. We are also always busy. We have to keep going. We know it. Word of mouth to the next person. And there is so much being lost there that actually you're shooting yourself in the foot. So get your foundations on that. And once you have that process documented, align it with the touch points of the overall organization. So at EA, we have something that's called a GDF, which is a game development framework. And that table is an exercise was done of aligning the UX research touch points to that game development framework. We were building that language with the company and the value that we were providing. So ultimately, once you have your house in order, what you're doing, and how it aligns, don't just look inwards. Look at the best practices across the industry. It wasn't just by chance I pointed out to Google. There was other information from other game companies. For me, recently talking with people from Bungie and how they have been going through their process of UX maturity as well. You want to be on that cutting edge. And, like karma comes, what you give comes back. So keep an eye for what's out there as well. And when you have all that, challenge yourself working with others to build that roadmap, what should be for UX in the company. And go big. Again, think about long term. Think about how that whole process of 20 years should be in place. So, key question for you, what are your key processes that should cover all products? And I do mean all products because another pain point of UX maturity is scale. And that one will also come up in place. So how you're going to scope, what is your minimum viable UX process from what it should be across the company? And again, bring that language to be able to talk to other people in your organization. I mentioned to you about you want to have the right people in the right place. And you have to give them the right tools, because otherwise you are not giving the proper tools for doing their work. So also do a survey of the land on what are your current tools and what actually they are enabling and what they are not enabling. So for instance, at EA, we use Frostbite for all our PC and console games. It was built from the ground up as a technological component. It was very engineer-focused, but now as being the in-house product to use, it has to have become more experience design friendly, because otherwise we were relying too much on engineering time to actually make those implementations, which goes back to that pain points and iterative process I was talking about earlier. So are your tools really distributing the workload across all the different functions? Are you having people who are highly specialized, using highly specialized tools that then they cannot share with anyone? I also talk about the tools regarding remote collaboration. How are you doing critiques for people who are not only on-site, but on-site, and also people who can track that through time? So what are the tools that should be part of that basic toolkit? And lastly, we talk about culture. And you have to identify the current efforts that you have, how you're going to be fostering for the continual learning. I mentioned to you the EA, we have the pillars, we have our internal community of practice, we're an internal conference, but also be part, again, in and out. What are those part of the industry? And you're doing all great, you're an XDA, that's an excellent conference, but how you're also going to bring that back. So make sure that next week you start putting a deck together of your key lessons learned. Grab some of your colleagues and your other people in other functions to start lunch and learn and what value you learned today to start aligning. So be the change that you want to be in that culture. It might sound, again, cliche on that, but be that void of change. What are those values and behaviors that you want to see? So all that is bringing us to the takeaways. And here I want to give you the key parts that you should take with you. The first one was about this UX multifaceted discipline. It transcends the whole organization. So be generous with yourself and be generous with each other across the company because you're all in the same boat. UX maturity, multiple stages that you want to augment those capabilities. Why? Because you have an experienced design team that has a lot of breadth, but you have to nurture that team, helping them to define those roles, how to do it, the tools and the communication. And importantly, you need to come from both ends. You need the company culture to be wide, and that is going to come from the bottom up, but also from the top down. So do your part on that. And that's it. We have time for Q&A. And
if the question comes in other language, we have it turned on for you, so you just...
Okay. So I can take questions in any language. I have translator here. I also speak Spanish, so yes.
Veronica, we have time, only one question.
Okay.
Posso perguntar? Tô
I
aqui,
see
ó.
hands there.
Aqui, ó. Bem em frente, in front of you.
Oh, there we are.
Thank you so much, Veronica. Amazing talk. I'm really interested in how you guys are structured in terms of teams when we talk about UX research, particularly when you have the, previously yesterday we heard some speakers talking about having the UX inside the agile cells, the UX researcher that goes align, looking at the long term, like you say. So how do we structure the team in order to achieve what you mentioned about keeping an eye on the end goal, but also the daily deliverables? So how do you structure your team in order to achieve that?
Yeah, definitely. So the way that we have been doing it for structuring the team has been mostly that hybrid model. So for us was finding the specific, maintaining the unity of the team and having that centralized. And we have transitioning sometimes. We were more in the product arm of the organization. We've been on the marketing side of the organization. And even those transitions have not been necessarily shifting the way that we work. It was more about the collaborations that we could do with different partners So maintaining that a core central component has been key for finding those other part of organization that you want to work with. Yet, we had to maintain a part of being embedded because you want to actually move at the same time that the team is. So the person is ultimately almost like belonging to two teams at a time. So they still belong, the official organizational chart will be the researcher belongs to the central team on research, and that's the direct line. And then it also belongs to the specific team that they work with. So the person working on Battlefield, they actually sit next to the Battlefield designers. They are part of the Battlefield team. They are also introduced to the rest of the Battlefield organization as they are one of us. And that's huge. But we have to have maintained those two components. So hybrid has been the best. Cool. Thank you. So I just think on the screen we have 4 minutes or...
Oh, one more task.
Okay. And I see there's another hand here.
Veronica, hey. So glad to have you here.
Thanks.
My name is Vinny, and I have a question for you. Like how AI how EA are getting ready for VI and AR market, and what do you think that are the abilities that a designer should have to attend those standards?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it's another way of disruption, right? How we accommodate for different platforms. And for us, the way that we're getting ready for that is to actually see other products that have been using AR and VR primarily. So sometimes different industry can start being like too much inwards and they want the best practice for only their industry. But you actually have to get outside your own industry to actually be more effective. So we did gather the best practices broad for the platform in itself. And the reason because of that is that users are going to start generating their own mental models of how these things behave. So if we start doing our own thing in our own industry, we're actually going to be creating probably another mental model that is completely different to what the early adopters, who are actually the evangelizers of that new platform, are going to communicate. So we did it, again, like what was the best practice overall for the platform? What are the common pain points, particularly for users? You know, what are the reasons why people are getting dizzy, why they will be like the sense of like having your peripheral vision adjusted all the time. So how wide it is going to have a sense of how you're going to be feeling. A lot of research as well to ultimately assess the threshold that people have been able to play the game and still feel good about it. And allow extra time. That was actually very important. You have a lot of known unknowns, and you need to account that that is going to increase your time. So even for doing research, in a typical session, we will be saying, okay, you know, half an hour in and out, or we get what we needed. But we knew that we have so many unknowns that we almost like double the prediction of the amount of effort that was going to take us.
Okay, so do you think that those are the abilities that we as designers should have as a screenless experiences, right? That's how you think that we should have. Thanks
Yes,
so much.
Yes, welcome.